Hello, today's September 2nd, 2024. In the United States, it's Labor Day. In the UK, I think it's Monday. And I'm honored to have with me Andrew Bridgen, former member of Parliament. We got to meet in January 2024 in Parliament. And I think now if you want to get in Parliament, you're going to need a visitor's pass, unfortunately, sadly. So tell us, Andrew, what I don't know. There's so many questions about what's going on in the United Kingdom, Great Britain, England. What happened with that election? What happened to and with you in that election?
It's inexplicable. My vote dropped from 2019, where the fourth time I was re-elected, from 63% to apparently 3%. I don't believe that's what happened. There's a lot of very strange circumstances around the election. I was very concerned about a year ago when I'm standing as an independent, and I heard that the whole of the elections department in the local government, which run the elections in northwest Leicestershire, they all resigned en masse on a Friday, and they were replaced by a whole new team. These people had been in that department for as long as I've been in politics. I asked the chief exec what on earth was going on when the whole department resigned on one day and were replaced, and I didn't have any warning that they were resigning, and I never saw any job adverts for the new people coming in. And the chief executive assured me it was all fine and it was the right time for them to move on, whatever that means. The election campaign for myself, I thought, went well. We were well funded. We had more volunteers than anybody else. Very good response on the doorsteps from the public. I know what winning feels like. I've done it 4 times. I've been the MP for 14 years, and it all felt very good. When we got to the count, we were in a new sports centre for the count, which is more accessible from all parts of the constituency than the old sports centre. And my seat had actually got smaller because of the number of new houses that have been built on the boundary changes. I actually lost 2 wards from my constituency, which meant that I would imagine we dropped from about 120 square miles to about 95 square miles, which would make it easier to get the ballot boxes in. And the ballot boxes had always been in by 40 minutes. And the first thing the returning officer announced when the count started was that we might well not be getting onto the count till 2 o'clock in the morning, 4 hours after the polls had closed, because of getting the ballot boxes in, which just didn't make sense. Just didn't make sense at all. So yeah, the votes that were counted, I've no doubt that I got just over 3% of the vote. Since then, wherever I go in the constituency, people tell me they voted for me. People who said they wouldn't have voted for anybody else. People who voted for me 4 times previously. Whether I go to the garage to fill up my car with fuel, or to the coffee shop to buy a coffee, or to the supermarket to get some groceries. It's very strange. On top of that, I'm pretty much a pariah for the establishment and the mainstream media. I would maintain it's very suspicious that if I was really humiliated at the polls and abandoned by my constituents, having stood up about the vaccine harms, the excess deaths, the WHO, the war in Ukraine, that the mainstream media would have celebrated my defeat and pointed out that the conspiracy theorists had been dumped by his electorate. But there was absolutely no mention of it at all in the mainstream media. And interestingly, I've uncovered since, you may not be aware in America, but we have an exit poll, which is in the UK, which is taken on polling day. It was organised by Ipsos Mori and the British Broadcasting Corporation, the BBC. And what they do is they poll, they stand outside 500 polling stations in different constituencies in the country. There's 650 constituencies. And they ask every fourth person who comes out how they voted, collate all those votes, send them into London, and that gives the exit poll prediction of how people have voted. And the exit poll is announced about 5 minutes after the polls have closed at 10 p.m. I've uncovered that Ipsos Mori had organised to do an exit poll in North West Leicestershire, in my constituency. But then, despite the fact that they were struggling to get the people to man 500 polling stations, and the one in North West Leicestershire was all sorted, 2 weeks before the election, they decided they didn't want to poll North West Leicestershire. When they were struggling to organise them around the country, that is inexplicable. And they're now very reluctant to respond to freedom of information requests as to why that decision was made. So, yeah, it came as a bit of a shock. So I'm no longer a member of Parliament. Apparently the Labour Party won in my constituency. It's a bit of an enigma.
I think Churchill said about the Soviet Union, it's a mystery wrapped inside an enigma, inside a puzzle, something like that. This would seem to be along the lines of, it actually came up, I was watching our talk from back in January, and as an example of selective scrutiny, I mentioned the late, not lamented Jeffrey Epstein. You know, every single traffic stop has 15 cameras on you, and if you go 2 miles per hour or kilometers, whatever you have, over the speed limit, they'll send you a ticket. You know, I got one we were in Italy a couple of years ago. I got one just the other day. They're sorting things out, and they found us, I don't know, some pedestrian area, I don't know, whatever it was. You know, they have cameras doing everything. But when Jeffrey Epstein decides to, kill himself or not, there's no cameras. Everyone's asleep at the wheel. Nobody witnessed it.
Yeah, I also uncovered, discovered at the count, a whole part of the car park was all coned off with security guards, which I've never seen before at any of the 4 previous general elections. And I asked what's going on here, and they said that's for the ballot boxes to arrive. We don't want anyone near the ballot boxes. And I've never seen election officials as scared. They were terrified at that count. They were so nervous. I thought they were standing for election. None of it added up, Randy.
Yeah, no, it's an odd thing. So, we know elections can never be played with, and they can never be rigged, and no one should ever question them. Those are standards we've learned very well in the United States. It's become so difficult to count these things for some reason. I have no idea.
I called foul on the 2020 election in America, and I was decried as a conspiracy theorist in the UK. But I mean, it's amazing that in that election, Biden just got the swing in the states he needed. And I think it was, I looked at the bellwether counties, and Trump won sort of 24 out of 25 of the bellwether counties and lost the election, which is unprecedented.
Yeah. It's funny you use the word unprecedented, because he was unprecedented.
Exactly.
As a result. Sorry for the pun. So this is kind of a mystery. How many? I knew you ran as an independent. Was there a conservative or a reform candidate running against you? How many candidates were in your race? What was the actual math ultimately, such as it was presented to you?
Well, there were I think there were 7 candidates, but there were 6 candidates last time. There were 6 candidates at the previous election, where I got 63% of the vote. And also, Randy, my constituents weren't unused to voting with me against the Conservative Party, the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats, and everyone else. If you remember back to the referendum we had on our EU membership in 2016, the Conservative Party, the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats were but they were all for Remain. I led the Leave campaign, not only in Northwest Leicestershire, but in the whole of the East Midlands. And my constituents voted 61% to 39% and backed me to leave the European Union. Indeed, the East Midlands voted 59% to 41%, with only one constituency out of, I think, 42 voting to Remain. All the rest voted to leave. So it's not that they haven't backed me before against the government and the opposition. They have.
No, it's a odd situation. And so, as far as that ballot placement, was your name, prominently, or did people have to write it in?
I was where I was the time before. I was second on the ballot paper alphabetically. Bridgen, Andrew, number 2 on the ballot paper, exactly in the same position I was the previous election. Strange.
So, all right, let's see if we can kind of segue. First of all, I can take your thoughts about why this happened. Seems like a lot of coincidences all at once. There's a kind of a meme on Twitter and whatnot. He died. Somebody just died of coincidence. Have you seen that? Somebody has myocarditis or something like that. They die of a total coincidence. So it seems like a lot of coincidences have all the election officials resign simultaneously. Have you been able to follow up with any of them, to talk with them?
No, they disappeared off the scene. I think. There's another one as well. Is that the council locally were moving offices, and I found out that they'd agreed that with me, and I thought that was a good idea. They were going to have the old premises were going to be demolished. They're going to move all the backroom services into office blocks that they own on industrial estates, and move the public-facing services into empty retail units in the shopping centre. And I was absolutely fine with that. But I found out that although that's happened, they actually left the elections department on their own, unsupervised, in those big empty offices for 6 months, which again doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, it's not that hard a job to do. Just count something. We all know how to do this, and it's become a very opaque and mysterious situation.
Well, some of the constituencies in other parts of the country had actually declared their vote before all the ballot boxes were in Northwest Leicestershire. And I say again that the constituency had got smaller, and the voting counting, the sports centre that we were counting from is more centrally located. There's nowhere more than absolute maximum 25 minutes drive, probably 20, from where the count was. So why it would take more than half an hour to get all the ballot boxes in?
Yeah, what percentage of the vote did you get the last round, when you ran as an MP?
What, the election 8 weeks ago?
No, previous, the one previous to that, when you were elected.
60. I got 63%.
So you went from 63% to
3%. Yes.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, Randy. I've spoken to a lot of people. Wherever I go in the UK, people come up to me and thank me for the work I've done, whatever part of the country I'm in. But I think I could get 3% of the votes in any area in the country without putting any leaflets out.
Yeah, you could be the marijuana and beer party and get 3%.
Yeah,
it's crazy. What do you think?
And I'm acknowledged locally as the person who broke the biggest judicial miscarriage of justice in UK history.
Right, we were talking about that last time. The
post office scandal. Yeah.
So I wanted to kind of follow up on that. I mean, where have things gone with that?
It's gone the same way as all the other scandals that have broken. The infected blood scandal. My constituents have been exonerated, but they still haven't had their compensation agreed from the government. That's unbelievably bad. Just as my constituents who were affected by the infected blood scandal. have not had their compensation. That was announced just before the election was called. It's a huge potential liability to the incoming Labour government. But the report that accompanied that, which has been a review which took many years, I mean, it's absolutely scathing about certainly former members of the House of Commons who are accused by the judge who led the inquiry in deliberately misleading the public and Parliament over the origins of the infected blood and who knew what and when. You know, one of the last questions I asked in Parliament before the election was on this topic, and I think I finished off my statement to the minister saying that, you know, clearly crimes have been committed and it's a crime to cover up a crime. So when are the arrests going to start? And if that has to include current and former members of this House, meaning the House of Commons, then so be it. But there haven't been any arrests. No one's being held to account. And as long as we have a so-called democratic system that those who allow, cover up, perpetrate these crimes against the public are allowed to just get away with it scot-free, it's very difficult to see how anything's going to change. And, you know, I believe personally that the biggest crime in humanity ever has been committed and is ongoing with regard to the COVID-19 so-called vaccines, which are neither safe nor effective, but are still being pumped out. I mean, Randy, on the doorsteps during the election, you know, I met constituents who'd had 7 shots. One gentleman came to me. He said he was going to vote for me, and he regretted it. He'd had them, but he'd had 9 shots.
Last time we met, I gave you my Alec Baldwin example, wherein we presume that SARS-CoV-2 is Alec Baldwin, and he's got 4 brothers, Daniel, Billy, or maybe 3 brothers, Stephen, so forth, and they look sort of like him. And you have your police, which is the immune system through a vaccine, recognize Alec Baldwin because he's the one who shoots people, but the other Baldwins don't do that. And so the other Baldwins are the variant strains. And then lo and behold, years later, you know, a year or 2 later, Haley Baldwin, who's Justin Bieber's wife, she is technically a Baldwin. She shows up, and there's no purpose even being like vaccinated against her because she's harmless. That's Omicron. And so people have had these repeat immunizations against Alec Baldwin, which was the one for the first couple of years. And then they made the bivalent, which is Alec Baldwin, Haley Baldwin. But that was ineffective against all the intermediate Baldwins, Stephen, Daniel, whatever, the alpha, beta, delta, you know, variants and so forth. And it's really a category mistake to keep throwing out anti-Alec Baldwin when presumably in my version of the world, he's been incarcerated. He's not on the scene anymore because he shot the woman on the set and whatnot. He's actually walking free, another story, but he's not going to do that again in any event. So this is the thing. SARS-CoV-2 is long gone. I actually have an article in Daily Skeptic UK from 2 years ago, which is still pertinent today, that it's, you know, basically a category mistake to consider Omicron and SARS-CoV-2. It's not a lineal descendant of those. It's a sui generis. It's its own, you know, virus, such as coronaviruses have always been. You know, if you go back to a textbook in the before times, you know, 1998, you can find a textbook showing coronavirus is the second most commonly named cause of the common cold. So it's been around as long as humans, probably before humans, and it's a common cold. And so now people, when they have a common cold, it happens to be coronavirus, they test it, they say, oh my God, I've got SARS-CoV-2, blah, blah, blah. They put a mask, they do all this stuff. It's a lunacy. And to do these things, you know, in the absence of any good data, and mind you, in the fact that the original one, even we stipulate the original one was right on target for SARS-CoV-2, it was sort of pointless for most people because they're not even going to get sick from SARS-CoV-2. And every vaccine has a health issue potentially. So there was really no risk benefit done for it. And lastly, I'm sorry for my tirade, but lastly, if you were going to do a vaccine, you do it before the illness. That's what we do with flu shots. You get a flu shot before. You never have the flu shot afterward. So if you have let's make one H2N3 from 3 years ago, and you keep taking the H2N3 vaccine over and over again, you're not preventing against next year's flu. It has
Randy, do you think that vaccinating in the face of a pandemic actually drove the variants?
Well, they were doing it, that those variants were doing that themselves. So no, I don't think so, really, because most people had already been exposed to things, maybe mildly to a certain extent, but this is kind of the natural flux of
And no one wanted to talk about natural immunity, did they?
I mean, this is, we see the flu shot every year. There's a new flu shot because there are new variants. Everyone understands this. They're percolating all the time between Chinese farmers and their pigs they bring indoors, blah blah blah. And this kind of like an animal reservoir, whatever. With SARS-CoV-2, I mean, all viruses that attenuate just in humans, that exist just between people, the common colds basically, all those self-attenuate to common cold variety because it's not really pointful for the virus. Not that the viruses have brains, but it on a population basis, a virus can't be too powerful and transmissible at the same time. We see this with Ebola. Everyone's like, every couple of years, like, oh my God, Ebola is coming around. Well, it never comes around because it's like a meteor or a crater. It's like, boom, it explodes and everyone stays away from it, or volcano. Everyone, I mean, some people die from a volcano exploding, but most people stay away from it. So it's not really contagious. So Ebola, things that are, basically have two choices of virus. You can either be super dangerous or super transmissible, but you don't have something that's both, because if people die too fast, they can't transmit it. So again,
that was something I pointed out back in a speech in December 21 to the UK Parliament, pointing out that it looked like Omicron was probably the best Christmas present we could ever have had.
Oh, absolutely.
And we didn't need to go into Plan B, more lockdowns, more masking, mandating National Health Service staff to have the vaccine. I remember I upset the government that day. I voted against them 4 times and spoke in that debate against them. And in fact, I finished off that speech by saying, I think the last line was that the only pandemic we've really had is a pandemic of fear, and it's got to stop.
Well, I know you can't spell pandemic without panic. The letters are kind of interspersed in there. They actually have a dem in the middle, I think. So here, that's.
I'd like to share a few things that happened to me in the interactions with my electorates during the election campaign, which I think you'll find quite interesting.
Please do.
So several people introduced themselves to me on the doorsteps as being civil servants who work for central government. They all said that I was right about net zero, about the vaccines, about the pandemic response, the lockdowns. And one of them said to me, there is no doubt whatsoever, Andrew, that the government are thinning the herd, which is an interesting comment to make from a senior civil servant. I also, on the doorsteps, met people who work at the airport. East Midlands Airport is in northwest Leicestershire. It's the biggest freight handler in the UK. It's right in the middle of the country. And these people claimed that they work at a company at the airport which is carrying out geoengineering. Some of them said they'd left the company because of their disgust at what was going on. Something which my government maintains is not going on over UK airspace.
Well, pretty much, the difference between a conspiracy theorist and a historian is 2 years.
Yeah, well, but that's sort of the way events are moving forward. I mean, goodness knows what they could be doing in 2 years' time.
No, I understand, but my point is, you have a conspiracy theory, and then 2 years later, you find out you were right. It wasn't a conspiracy.
Have you seen the data on the? I mean, we've got a avian flu vaccine being manufactured in America at the moment. The initial trials for that safety and efficacy of that vaccine would indicate to me that it's probably 4 times more lethal to those who are administered it than the COVID-19 vaccines. Yet it's still approved and it's being manufactured now. And of course, we've got the WHO declaring a public health emergency of international concern over monkeypox, or mpox, as we have to call it now. We're in dangerous times, Randy. This new Labour government in the UK is going, I'm absolutely certain they're going to approve the WHO, the World Health Organization's pandemic treaty and the amendments to the international health regulations. in which case the next pandemic will be called by the Director General of the WHO. And since they've done no investigation into the guidance they issued during the COVID-19 pandemic, so sure are they that it was all perfect, I'm very suspicious that with regard to the WHO, you know, history repeats itself if you fail to learn the mistakes of the past. They haven't learned from any of their mistakes. They haven't acknowledged any of their mistakes. And at the next pandemic, we're going to get exactly the same lockdowns, mask mandates, vaccine mandates with mRNA so-called vaccines.
Yeah. I write for brownstone.org, which is a wonderful magazine. And we run it without advertising. We're not beholden to anybody. Your interview with Dr. Bhattacharya and Liz Gunn, talked about kind of the price that people have and the price that people take, and they are variously complicit. He was pointing out that pharmaceutical companies, actually, I think it might have been Tucker Carlson who said this, that the reason pharmaceutical companies advertise so much on the news is not because they need to sell product per se, but because it's kind of like having the sword of Damocles over your head. You realize that if you're not doing well, that sword, ISIS style, will land up on the soft parts of your head attachment, your neck. But at Brownstone, one of my recent articles is Dr. Fauci's DNA of caring. This is his self description. He's on a book tour, naturally, because why not? And he says, I have this, I've always had this DNA of caring. His dad was a pharmacist, and he was a neighborhood kid, and he always had cared so much about people that he became a bureaucrat. He has the MD degree. He didn't go treat patients. I did primary care for 30 something years, and I did some of the worst neighborhoods, as it were, high crime areas, whatever. I'm not going to say I have a DNA of caring. I did what was what I thought was right at the time, but I don't think I have any DNA of caring. Matter of fact, some people think I'm a little bit kind of too methodical and so forth. But I try to treat people as they come. I try to treat human beings as human beings. But I would never, I think it's kind of a funny thing to say you have DNA of caring. Anyway, his DNA of caring seems to be very much in line with the mRNA of vaccines. I think a lot of this was kind of a bait and switch in order to promote the mRNA vaccine modality, the platform, because to that point, mRNA vaccines had never even passed only phase 1. We in the U.S. we have phase 1, 2, and 3, and the 2 and 3 are harder and more expensive and more difficult. Phase 1 is very easy phase, and mRNA vaccines as a whole have been tried for a lot of illnesses, including my my bugbear, Zika, upon which I've written. And they wanted to trot one out back in 2017, and Bill Gates actually was going to donate $100 million to Moderna to have a mRNA, as long as they would put it on an mRNA platform. So for a long time, this has been really, the thing they actually want. They want the mRNA. They don't care about the illness. So I mean, maybe I don't think that the illness really matters that much. For Zika, the important part is the mRNA. They want that modality out there because they think that it's going to fix all kinds of other things and be able to personalize all kinds of other treatments. And maybe they will down the road, but it has to go in the right order. A lot of people want solar panels, they want windmills, and they wind up having this government force, which puts them everywhere beyond which they're economically feasible. So a lot of companies, we had Solyndra back in the 2000s, they put a lot of money in Solyndra, and it failed because it's not a real economic model yet. With the mRNA vaccines, they basically put the cart before the horse. They want that, and they don't really care about the people. Imagine, it wasn't just the people who wanted it. They forced this upon billions of people around the earth, and it's a horrible experiment. And again, they may turn out to do certain things for MS or you pick the illness, ALS. I mean, horrible illnesses down the road, and then we'll all quote unquote look silly for doubting it. But in the meanwhile, there were ways to do that were not putting people at risk. And I think over and over again, the evidence is there that this was really about getting the mRNA platform in existence. And it's a sadness, in my view.
Well, I think there are senior academics who are on the go, who are now beginning to acknowledge that no one under 65 should have ever, on the risk benefit analysis, probably no one under 65 or 75 should have ever had them. But, I kicked off in the UK and spoke out against them when they came to get authorization to vaccinate healthy children from 5 down to 6 months. And although I was criticized and cancelled by the media, as a result of that one speech in December 2022, UK didn't authorize those vaccines for healthy children of that age. And they're one of very few nations, developed nations, that didn't.
Yeah. I think there's been, a little bit of rollback. I got peeled off of YouTube. My channel got just disappeared.
Well, Safe and Effectives are gone. I got a 3-hour debate in the main chamber in April this year, a 3-hour debate in the main chamber of the House of Commons on trends in excess deaths and the pandemic response. I couldn't just have it on trends in excess deaths because we'd already had that debate in Westminster Hall, and you can't have the same debate title over and over again. So we had to have the same debate but call it something slightly different. What I can guarantee you is, even in April this year, none of the ministerial responses or the Labour opposition front bench, nobody would dare say Safe and Effective. Safe and Effective's gone. It's now as the best solution to the problem. So Safe and Effective has gone. And of course, I pointed out in that speech in April that Safe and Effective was actually the marketing slogan for thalidomide, the drug brought in by Kemi Grunethal in the late 1950s that resulted in massive death of unborn children and horrendous disabilities as a treatment for morning sickness for pregnant women. It was withdrawn in 1961, but the word thalidomide was not allowed to be mentioned in the chamber of the House of Commons in the UK until 1972. They sat on it for 11 years, and judges in Strasbourg had ruled that speakers of the House of Commons had deliberately suppressed questions and debate on thalidomide for 11 years. And the fact is that after thalidomide, drug manufacturers are not allowed to use the phrase safe and effective without serious caveats. But when it came to the COVID-19 vaccines, the drug companies didn't need to do their own marketing. It was done by politicians, senior medical officers, and civil servants who did the marketing for the drug companies and marketed them in a way to the public which the drug companies themselves would never be allowed to do.
Yeah, getting back to my Fauci thing, when you do that, that is essentially fascism. It's corporatism, instrumentalism. There are a number of words for it. Fascism is the word nobody likes to hear because it reminds of Nazis and whatnot. But the concept is of corporatism and fascism in a sense is to have kind of this regulatory capture cycle writ large. We have government and you have private industry.
Big business.
And the government favors that private industry, and the private industry does things, to keep back up the government. So the money circulates, and they both kind of like have a tornado spiral upwards, and they get powerful like a tornado. It's pulling the air, and it starts to spin, and it develops its own force from the surroundings. But that is essentially what's happening. The bodies that should have had the scrutiny and had the weight. The kind of the gravitas to say no didn't, and this is a huge disappointment. I have the little MD after my name, which is either mentally deficient, morally decrepit, or medical doctor. I can't really decide which, but one presumes that you put all that time and effort into getting it. That means that you're not, say, a pimp, a prostitute, a dealer, a drug dealer. You're theoretically a step above that, and you can't put everyone's addicted to mortgages, and we're addicted to getting a salary and all that kind of stuff. But at some point, you have to be able to say no. Everyone is curious, like, oh my God, how did the Nazis ever take power? And they don't want to see themselves this way. But the kind of the dark veil that has dropped across the Anglosphere, which we all thought were liberal democracies and whatnot, are very much illiberal. And whether they're democracies or not, who knows? I mean, democracy can be its own form of tyranny, as the Romans and Greeks knew at various times.
Well, we're supposed to be able to speak in the chamber of the House of Commons elected representatives without fear or favour. And my experience in 14 years culminated in the fact that there's clearly an awful lot of fear. I was threatened. I was offered bribes. And there's an awful lot of favour. And that is not speaking without fear or favour. Privately, a number of MPs told me they were vaccine harmed. They'd had relatives who were vaccine harmed. I mean, seriously vaccine harmed. But not one of them would speak out. And that's the complete failure of every protection and institution for the public well-being. That's our parliament, the medical regulators in your and my country and across the world. But it's not surprising, Randy, when you look at the Medicines and Healthcare Product Regulatory Agency in the UK is 86% funded by the industry that it seeks to regulate. And our Vaccination and Immunisation Joint Committee, which advises the government, they in their personal declarations of interest, they declared £1 billion of investments, the committee members, in the industry they were seeking to advise on. Clear conflicts of interest.
Yeah, this is actually I have a case pending. Hopefully it gets heard in the Supreme Court of the United States. It started earlier than COVID, but it has to do with the fact. I mean, it's a Sherman Act case. You may not be. It's a United States thing. The Sherman Act is an antitrust, and it was used in the United States in 2015 by the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, against one of the dental boards, like a medical board, North Carolina Dental Board of Examiners, because they were basically protectionist. They were fencing out a business. I'll just say, I'm not sure I don't remember what it was. I think it was doing ultrasound to clean your teeth. And you didn't need a dentist per se to do it, because you just got a little gadget to clean people's teeth. And they said, "Oh no, you're out. You can't do this because it has to be a dentist." Well, that favors dentists. And so here they actually did a Sherman Act case, which is usually against kind of breaking up big monopolies and stuff like that. But they used it against the medical board because they're saying, for all we don't know that you were corrupt, but it's impossible for us to guide our knowledge based on the situation. You're a bunch of dentists keeping out people who aren't dentists from something that doesn't have to be done by dentists. And so the FTC won that case. And I have a similar case because I was my license was suspended in 2014. I was treating narcotic addiction by tapering people with Suboxone, which is a narcotic itself. But just for 3 or 4 months, gradual tapering, all well and good. I saw thousands of people and helped a lot of them. Not every single person, wants fully to be cured, but that's another story. And I was somewhat hounded out of the profession because I didn't see addiction as a disease. I see addiction as an addiction. It's a word for it. But they want the disease model where you keep people on the Suboxone, you keep people on the methadone interminably. And this is a great idea for the people who make Suboxone, the people who make methadone, and the people who treat with methadone and treat with Suboxone. It's really good for physicians. It might be good for government. I have no idea. Maybe the money kind of filters around. It's good for the pharmaceuticals. I'm not sure it's good for the patients because
we're gonna have a statin scandal, aren't we?
Yeah, but just to finish my point, we don't do this for cocaine. We don't. If there were replacement cocaine, I bet people would be on. They would medicalize cocaine as a disease, and that you have to be on replacement cocaine forever. We don't do it for sex addicts. We don't take Tiger Woods and start giving him 2 hookers a week for a few months because he can't stop doing it. We understand that addictions are sad affairs and whatnot. The mind is an interesting place, but we don't necessarily encourage it. We kind of go to sobriety for alcohol. We go to sobriety for cocaine, for sex addiction, for gambling. We say, stop that. Bob Newhart, who just recently died, had a TV show and he played a psychiatrist. And a woman comes in, she's doing something horrible or whatever. And he says, "You're not going to like my advice, but it's very quick." And she preps her, gets her mind ready. He's like, "Stop it." Whatever she's doing. He's like, "Just stop it. Stop doing that. Stop it." Anyway, I didn't do that with my addiction treatment, but I did tell people that they don't have a disease. They can move beyond this. They weren't born addicted, and they have a problem. I get it, but they can kind of move towards something else. I mean, this is the whole concept of redemption, Alcoholics Anonymous, and so forth. Anyway, so my case against Supreme Court is in the Supreme Court against the medical board is along those lines. I'm not sure how you do it. It's like there's almost too many, kind of agencies to combat. In the UK, it seems like this kind of, I know you have a monarchy, but the monarchy is actually not really that powerful. The real monarchy these days is this kind of entrenched bureaucracy.
Well, also we have the
Omerta, there's kind of like a mafiocracy of people who, are kind of in on it, and they're getting paid, and you don't matter.
Well, also the World Economic Forum set up something called the Regulators Pioneer Fund, and I found out that they, very senior important regulators in the UK, like the Solicitors Regulatory Authority, the Civil Aviation Authority, and all the other regulators were getting huge sums of money from the World Economic Forum, and clearly the worry is, and there is a certain amount of evidence, that any one of their members who goes against the official narrative, they tend to come down on them rather like the General Medical Council for doctors, with an absolute ton of bricks. And how can any regulator be independent if they're taking money from a supranational body like the World Economic Forum, who clearly have an agenda?
It's a kind of a sad state of affairs. So I'd like to kind of, before we round out the hour, I'd like to pivot to a little bit about what's going on in the UK. There was the Southport stabbing, and then there's kind of protests. In the United States, we had this BLM moment, George Floyd, and I personally think that the actual George Floyd incident and the ones that preceded Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, there had been riots the year before. I think people on this movement and on the left generally had been looking for this, police go get black person, and they found imperfect examples. George Floyd was, on a huge dose of fentanyl. He might very well have died from that. I don't know. I think the officer was following exact protocol. He got convicted of murder. I think there was a lot wrong in that case. But then there was rioting, and everything was forgiven because, you have justified anger. Even during the COVID summer, when everyone was supposed to be home, sheltering in place, whatever we call it, social distancing, it's like that was therapeutic. The public health establishment said, rioting for George Floyd is A-OK. That's an expression of public health.
We had exactly the same in the UK. We had BLM.
So you can do George Floyd, but here, the Southport killings, maybe it was misinterpreted as Islamic. The guy apparently was from Zimbabwe or someplace, and maybe not Islamic. But when the names are withheld, people have this presumption. Every time the name is withheld, it's like, oh, well, is it that again? Terrorism and so forth. And I don't want to, put you out on the ropes here, but what's been going on in the UK since then? We see, I've seen, videos on X and probably nowhere else of incidents in Birmingham and Leeds and Sheffield.
We've had the accusation made against Keir Starmer, the new Labour Prime Minister, of running two-tier law enforcement and justice. He's now known as two-tier Keir. And I saw plenty of video evidence of protests or marches by Muslim community members, men, armed with machetes, batons, absolutely unpoliced. An admission from Birmingham Police Force, West Midlands Police Force, that they'd spoken to the community elders and agreed that they would police themselves, partaking in violence against members of the white community, attacking a pub in particular where there was people inside who had to barricade themselves in. No sign of the police whatsoever. And also I saw a superintendent from West Midlands Police address this crowd, and afterwards and tell them they didn't want to arrest anybody, and could they leave all their weapons in the mosque and go home. And you can't imagine that they would have said the same to what they regard as far right, which is people from the white community who were concerned about the influx of illegal migrants. We have got an immigration problem in the UK and in Europe, and you've got one in America coming across your southern border. 1 in 27 people in my country now have been in the country for less than 2 years. And at the rate of migration into our country, legal and illegal, that number is going to be something like 1 in 15 that will have been here less than 3 years next year. And after that, it'll be dropping down to sort of 1 in 10. We've got a housing shortage. The percentage of new migrants in the workforce has risen massively over the last few years, and clearly what we would class as the white working class in the UK are getting rather annoyed about it, no less than with the politicians, where it doesn't matter whether it's a party of the right supposedly or the left. They all know what the public sentiment is. They wouldn't dare have a referendum on what level of migration we should allow into the country, because it'd be very, very low. And they all talk the talk, but no one ever does anything about it, and the numbers only ever go up. But it's something we're seeing across the world. I mean, the same thing's happening in Australia and New Zealand, the same thing's happening in Canada, the same thing's happening in America. It would appear that our governments are once again in lockstep against the wishes of the majority of the people. And I think it's starting to dawn on people why that is.
And will you tell us why?
That's because our politics has been captured, Randy. Our politicians are corrupt. They're beholden to masters who are not the people who elect them. The UK elections we just had was a pantomime. It was the illusion of choice that you can vote for the left-wing party or the right-wing party and you're going to get different policies. When ultimately, Rishi Sunak was completely owned by the World Economic Forum, and so is Keir Starmer, who's the Labour leader, now the new Prime Minister. He came back from Davos earlier this year, was asked by a reporter which should he prefer, Davos or Westminster, and he said, Davos, of course. I can do business with them. This is where the power is. I can do business with these people. Well, I would put it to him, that he has no business doing business with the unelected, unaccountable people who are at the World Economic Forum. He should answer to the British people. And maybe it's going to take a so-called socialist government betraying the people, as the Conservative government before it betrayed the people, to demonstrate that there is no difference between them. Randy, we've just had a Labour government announce something which the Conservatives would never have been able to get through the last Parliament. They've announced that they're going to cut the benefit support with heating for winter heating fuel allowance to the pensioners. At the same time as in October, they're allowing a 9% increase in heating costs. It's nothing they ever announced before the election or during that. In fact, before the election, Keir Starmer accused Rishi Sunak, the Conservative then Prime Minister, of planning to cut the winter fuel allowance. And now he's just done it. He's doing it now. I mean, no wonder. He's had one of the shortest political honeymoons in history. His popularity has dropped through the floor. And I would maintain to you that, if you're so blatantly bringing in policies which are not in the interest of the majority of the people in the country, if anybody, and the answer is that they're not working for the people. Just like Trudeau's not working for the Canadian people.
Well, I think the alternative,
Macron isn't working for the French people.
I think the alternative is change the majority of the people, change which people represent the majority. Well,
that's you can only do that if you have fair and free elections, can't you?
Not fair enough, but either way,
there's a hole in my bucket, isn't there? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I was on with Daniel Jupp, whom I'd like you to meet at some point. He wrote the with the path. I guess first book. The latest book is The Gates of Hell. The other one is has the word treason in it. It's kind of the way, and he's a PhD in the social sciences, but a populist. He voted reform, and he has his head on his shoulders. He's a great writer. He writes for and he writes a Substack called Jutlandia, based on his name, which is where everyone in the UK should move if they could, but they can't because it's not real. But it's really there's a book from the 1930s in Germany that excuse me, actually it's French, La Trahison des Clercs, I think by a guy named Binda, which is the treason of the clerks, the bureaucrats. And there's a follow-up book The Treason of the Intellectuals, which was written about COVID by Thomas Harrington through Brownstone. He basically modeled the one book after the other. But it's basically the treason of the elites, the treason of this kind of protected class. You know, the point I was making with Daniel Jupp the other day is that, you know, this might be democracy's fault line, that, you know, they have this illusion of having votes. And so if the votes aren't going your way, you replace the people who are voting. And so you get people coming who are dependent and they don't know anything about the history of the nature of the place, and they will vote for you because you brought them there to a better place. As miserable as it's going to become, it's better than the Congo. It's better than Chad. It's better than Libya. It's better than you name it, and so forth. So these people are going to be in your hand for a generation. But you know, there might be a problem with looking back at monarchies, you know, which are not, you know, historically not constitutional monarchies, but monarchies themselves. You know, kings and queens, they ruled with impunity, but at the base, they identified with the people around them. So you had a French king, and he was French. You know, I mean, Louis the 16th got overthrown, whatnot. But in a way, the people that replaced them, so, you know, working on this concept of democracy per se, oftentimes it becomes vicious. And I'm not a monarchist. I'm still kind of a Republican Democrat. You know, I want a constitutional republic, so you have rules by which the democracy can operate, so you don't violate the rights of the minority, but you need certain rules. And the democracy, such as they are, I mean, a lot of the worst COVID instances of repression, oppression, suppression, depression, all happened in the kind of parliamentary Anglosphere, the UK, Canada, New Zealand, where you have
Australia was bad.
Thank you. Sorry about that. It skipped over for some reason. Where you have a tyranny of the majority, and you have the rules. You don't have the Constitution that we have. So as bad as things were in the United States, you had states within the United States where you could go: North Dakota, South Dakota, Florida, Texas to a certain extent. You could go certain places and have a relief from that. Whereas in the parliamentary countries, that you're pretty much wiped out. You don't have the First Amendment. You don't have the Second Amendment. You don't have a genuine right to free speech. You don't have a right to protect yourself from the government, which has the majority, the exclusive right to weaponry.
But we've got old age pensioners. We've actually got convicted criminals being released early from prison to make room so that old age pensioners who've tweeted something about the incidents, say for instance, that we've talked about in Birmingham, publicising that, and then being accused of creating racial hatred and inciting people to riot. And getting 2 years in prison. Yeah,
it's 2 years, 2 tiers, 2 tier, 2 tier tiers, 2 years. It's, you know, we saw this with January 6th, which if it had been a real insurrection, they would have brought their weapons. You know, these people didn't bring their weapons. They were parading and so forth and led into the Capitol. I'm not saying everything was hunky dory, but you know, if you had a violence quotient for George Floyd riots versus, and frankly, the federal damage to federal buildings and police stations. We have a guy running for vice president now, Tim Walz, who apparently told the Minneapolis police to stand down and let the rioters come into their own building. They were humiliated. I have a dog. Right now, he's got a little bit of a belly problem. He's got the runs a little bit, and he's humiliated by having this. You can see he's like so miserable, like giving up his pride, his position. Imagine the police. I mean, if my dog feels bad about having, a little bit of a bellyache, imagine how the police there feel that they had to like abandon their offices, abandon their armory and everything like that, and let people rampage through the place and burn it to the ground. What kind of morale is this? This is kind of an utter hatred of everything.
We're having over here, we're having thousands of dedicated, experienced police officers just leaving the force now. The officers you really can't afford to lose.
Well, I don't know how you're all going to get through this, because I mean, two-tier Kier has 5 years, and it sounds like his majority is safe enough for what it was. It was a low turnout, but the way you guys run this thing, he's got enough seats.
Well, he got 60% of all the seats in Parliament.
Right, because the reform happened.
But more than that, and with only 20% of the adults who could have voted in the UK. So he has no real mandate from the people.
Well, it doesn't matter.
But under our arithmetic.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an unfortunate thing. I personally, I'm not a three-party person. I'm binary as far as elections go. The example I used with Daniel was, we have the Super Bowl, but whatever you want to call it, the finals of the World Cup. There's two teams there, and you go to the stadium, you pay your £1,000 or whatever to get in to the World Cup between, I don't know, England and
one of those is going to win it.
And that's it. If you come in with your, if it's between England and Italy, and you come in with your Belgian jersey and you're expecting Belgium to win, like, dude, you're in the wrong place. That happened a while ago. Right now, all it comes down to, you either want England or you want Italy. You either want the Chiefs or you want the 49ers. You either want...
The problem with our elections in the UK is that both teams are owned by the same owners, and they don't mind who wins. And the last election was not a race between the blue and the red team to the finish line. It was actually a baton handover. It was a relay, and the only loser, as will be demonstrated by what's happening now, was the British people.
Yeah. Well, good luck to you. I love England. We were there in January, which is not a heavily tourist time, as you know. I got to meet you, but it's a lovely place, and God bless you all. I mean, it's. I think
we're going to be in for a bumpy ride.
Yeah, I mean, I read about the Battle of Britain, but at least there you had places to hunker down. You knew where the enemy was.
Yeah, but it's not. We've got to sort it out in our own country because there's nowhere to run to, because it's happening in everybody's country. We do need a system. The American system is better because you're a much bigger country and you don't have that concentration of power that we have in the UK, which can lead to terrible abuses when power is more devolved down to the people, as in your state and federal system. There are some protections. We don't have that luxury, and the problem with absolute power is it corrupts absolutely, and it has been corrupted.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Andrew, for coming on. A last note, if people want to help support my video cast, they can go buy my book. I don't have it up here, but it's Overturning Zika. I'm going to have a couple other books out hopefully soon. I've got an article in Brownstone on the actual cause of the opioid epidemic, aside from the DNA of Fauci, Fauci's DNA of Caring article. So people can go to Brownstone and find my name. And if they want to follow you, Andrew, where would it be best for them to look?
On Twitter, at Bridgen, Bridgen.
All right, lovely. Thank you so much for being on. I look forward to seeing you again, hopefully sooner than later, and I appreciate you being on.